Good everyone, bonjour tout le monde, this is Roger, and welcome to this new season of Brothers in Arms. During this new season, we will cover the history of the legendary 1st Special Service Force, the North American unit that was created in 1942 as the first Special Force unit ever in North America, comprised of Canadian and US soldiers. So here I am in Helena, Montana, at Fort William Harrison, where the regiment was formed and where it trained before it was deployed to the war.
Well, the heavy water, the deuterium that is used to refine the uranium down to a weapons grade was coming out of Norway, as well as a lot of the hydroelectric that was supporting the factories in Germany. Mm-hmm. And so that was the target to a project called Project Plow. And a scientist from England by the name of Geoffrey Pike had the theory that if you had the right equipment and the right men trained, you could fight a war on the snowfields as well as you could fight a war at sea. So Prime Minister Churchill and Lord Mountbatten and Geoffrey Pike came over to the United States to present this Project Plow theory to the United States. So the agreement was that through the Commonwealth that Canadian soldiers and US soldiers would commit to this project, but technically it was an experiment. Mm-hmm. The concept of unconventional warfare, there was no handbook, there was no manual to follow. It had to be created and developed. They had gone to the Lord Lovat in England to see if the British commandos had any of this type of training, and they had had significant training in this unconventional warfare, but not for the missions that they were trying to prepare for. Mm-hmm. So Canada and the United States joined forces to create the 1st Special Service Force. At that time, Lieutenant Colonel Robert T. Frederick, and that's his picture there, he was a West Point graduate. He was given the mission of analyzing this project. And after his analysis, he said, it's a no-go, you can't do it, it's a suicide mission. You're going to train these men. The estimated survival rate was 10%. After Prime Minister Churchill and President Roosevelt and Lord Mountbatten and George C. Marshall, General Marshall got together, they were convinced that it had to happen. So because Lieutenant Colonel Frederick had done the analysis and he had the most knowledge of what needed to be done, he was given command of the unit, promoted to colonel, and they picked Fort William Henry Harrison here in Montana, one, because it was available, but two, also because it was very much like the terrain that they were going to go into in Norway. So on July 9th, 1942, the 1st Special Service Force was it stood up as a unit, and then on July 20th of 1942, Fort Harrison became the training post for the 1st Special Service Force. And officially soldiers started coming in early August. There were no barracks, there was no food, there was nothing here. It was just a rock pile. When they got boots on the ground in Helena in early August, the Canadians came down, they all came in by train. Their first training was airborne, and that was almost psychological in the sense that if I can get you to go out of an airplane, I can probably get you to do just about anything. So their first test was and their jump school was 5 days. 2 jumps, 5 days, you had your wings. Wow. But that was the training, and then from there, the conditioning training. It was not uncommon for them to go on 20-mile runs. Everything they did was double time running. They would go on 10 or 20-mile hikes with full rucks. One of their tests was a 100-mile full ruck. And Colonel Frederick knew that the conditioning, but the conditioning and the training were key, and every veteran that I ever talked to said that they survived because of that. And there was a testing process. There was a written test that they had to pass, and there was demolitions, navigation, all of that. If you failed any phase of that, they didn't have time to retrain, and they never retrained for replacements. They didn't have any. This mission was really one and done. So he surrounded himself with experts. He brought in a hand-to-hand combat instructor by the name of Pat O'Neill. He was Irish, but he was a policeman in Singapore, and he had a very unique style that he had learned, and I'm sure he learned it the hard way. The training that was here, the Canadian and U.S. came together. One of the challenges that Colonel Frederick had, and this is where he surrounded himself with good officers and good NCOs, was how do you combine two armies, two groups of men? There were about 800 Canadians that came down. How do you combine these men into one fighting force? And so rather than segregate them into Canadian and U.S., he integrated them and made sure that every unit had a mixture of U.S. and Canadian. So when they're out on that 20-mile run, the Canadians are saying, well, I'm not going to let this Yank beat me, and the U.S. soldiers are saying, well, I'm not going to let this Canadian beat me. So they actually pushed themselves harder and further in their training, and he knew that, and he used that. And at the end of the day, they were all one unit, and it came together, and I think that's the part of the brilliance of Colonel Frederick, was how he did that. And to this day, the U.S. and Canadian veterans, they're forcemen. There's no Canada, there's no U.S.
no difference.
There's still national pride.
Yes.
But when it comes to the force, they're forcemen.
Yeah.
And the winter of 42, 43 was a very hard winter in that he relied on the Norwegian soldiers, or the Norwegian ski instructors, to teach them how to ski, but he was also using that for conditioning, and the Norwegians were, they knew how to read the clouds, they knew how to read the weather, they knew how to survive if you got caught in a blizzard in the storm, so they taught them winter survival. So Colonel Frederick was bringing in experts in the fields, and even in today's world, these men are still considered experts. Actually, back in November of 42, they had been here for about 4 months training. The Norwegian mission was given to the Norwegian Underground. Now they're ready to go. They're wired. They're ready. They're looking for a mission. They don't have a mission. So they leave Helena on April 6th of 1943, head up to the East Coast for amphibious landing training. But the force, because of their amphibious landing training now, are called back to the West Coast to go up and remove the Japanese off of an island called Kiska, which is right on the outer tip of the Aleutian Islands. So that was really their first mission. And it turned out to be a dry run because the Japanese left the island under fog and under darkness, and so when the force landed with other units on the island of Kiska, the Japanese had left. But it was a good training, it was a good dry run. And so while they were coming back from Kiska, or getting ready to board the ships to come back from Kiska, General Mark Clark is coming up the boot of Italy, and he needs men because he has hit what was called the winter line. Germany had built a winter line. In fact, they had built several lines across the boot, the middle of the boot of Italy, as defensive lines, and the Allies had pushed up Italy to these winter lines, but the winter lines had pretty well stopped their advance. They needed men that were capable of fighting in the mountains, fighting in winter, and this was a perfect fit for the force.
Merci, Monsieur Woon, de nous avoir accordé cette entrevue très intéressante et d'avoir partagé avec nous votre connaissance de l'histoire de la 1st Special Service Force. Je vous invite à rester des nôtres lors des prochains épisodes, tandis que mon équipe et moi allons vous transporter en Italie sur le terrain, là où le 1st Special Service Force a connu son baptême de feu et s'est forgé cette réputation légendaire de la Brigade du Diable. Thanks for watching and for sharing our documentary with your friends. For Brothers in Arms, this is Roger. Till next episode, fair winds and soft landings, everyone. Airborne!